Hi there. Perfect.
Hello. Thank you for your patience and thank you for joining us today. I hope you've been able to admire and observe some of the plant profiles so far and the work as well. So we do have some things that are a little bit more kind of hands-on, touchy-feely, and then we have the basket different weavings in place as well. So we hope that there's many different aspects that you're able to enjoy. So I'm really honored and really excited, and we have our artists who are also we're part of the show to join us today and to share. We also are open to questions and dialogue, anything that you've maybe observed with invasive plants and with indigenous plant species. It's really exciting. We both have Alice will be joining us on Zoom. So she's done it. I thought it was the invasive at first, but it's this one here. It's the trailing blackberry. So to really look at so many different parts of our ecosystem to understand that there are, like with our plant profiles, we have the trailing blackberry. So most people don't recognize, we're not aware of what the trailing blackberry is versus the Himalayan. So it's really cool to get to look at the different pieces up close and to also with the plant profiles to understand some of that connection that we have as people to the ecosystem. And then we have Nicole, if you want to share about your work as well. And then Erica will also be sharing about pulling invasives. And so all of the aspect that we have is the connection to not only putting kind of replanting indigenous species back into the ecosystem, whether it's a school or a yard, or there's, we've been doing workshops to educate about how you can actually have your own garden. If you don't have access to a community garden, there's boulevards, so you can actually take over a little place and kind of guerrilla gardening, guerrilla invasive pulling as well. So those are some of the topics. If you have questions, feel free, and hopefully we can do the best to bring life to, for your own journey as well, to learn about the plants, and then if there's invasives that you're able to pull as well.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Nicole. I'm Stalo from Lakamo First Nation, and I have ancestry in Squamish Nation and Katzie Nation as well. And then on my mom's side, I'm third generation Canadian settler with mixed European heritage. And I'm just really happy to be here today. I worked for the Wildlife Trust for a really long time, so it feels like I'm coming home in a way, which is awesome. And it's also just an amazing place when you go for a walk on these lands and you see all the diverse plants and wildlife there are here, and just like learning slowly, right? Like learning about these plants and creating that relationship with it. But yeah, if you wanted to just talk a little bit about like my practice a little bit. So I haven't woven in a little while. I just started weaving again. The pandemic, was hard on all of us, and it was hard just, to feel like that motivation again. But some of these weavings I've done recently, and some of them are a few years old. So do you want to stand up? Yeah. Cool. So I'm like such a hand stalker. So this is a lot of cedar rope, and this is a really cool project that I did about connecting people people in the city to indigenous plants, right? And the main plant that I focused on was cedar. So this was like a multi-workshop event where I would go park myself at a local park in the city, and I'd have, either storytellers there, elders, knowledge keepers, or even sometimes just myself, and I'd have cedar. And I would teach people how to make rope while talking to them about cedar. And cedar, obviously, many of us might or may not know, it's a highly sacred plant. It's probably the most important plant there is to the Coast Salish people. It's so highly sacred because we call it the tree of life, the actual tree, and it provides so many different uses. The bark, obviously used for rope, for our clothing, for our hats, all those kinds of things. And so I'm going to pass this around actually. Now, don't worry about it. It's not super fragile. Rope is actually a lot, even though it looks thin, it's really sturdy. It's like my little nephew, actually, during the exhibit, he hung from this cedar rope right there, and he was like 4 or 5 at a time. I didn't let him, but he did it anyways. so it is like really strong. this rope is really special to me because, you know, you might look at it and go, oh, it's just like a bundle of rope. But when I look at this rope, I see all the stories, all the moments in time, all the connections that we had with each other, and all the people that were there, right? There was, you know, other Indigenous people, there were, you know, settler Canadians, there were new immigrant families, and all these people just came together and made rope and talked with each other and connected. So, you know, I look at this and I just see those kind of like encased in this. So I'm gonna pass it around if that's okay with y'all. And then I'll just talk a little bit about, you know, why it's so important that we learn about Indigenous plants, at least to me. You know, back in the day when settlers first arrived here, I think it was something like 95 to 98% of the lower mainland was logged. That's a huge amount of trees that we no longer have. And I think for Senaqwila and I, or any other Indigenous person, it can be really upsetting to go and look and know that this forest was once home to our ancestors and still is, but in a way, you know, a lot of these trees aren't the same trees that were there when they were there. And that's why it's so amazing when you find old growth cedars and when you go and see those in the wild and you can connect to that and learn about cedar, why it's so important to the Coast Salish people. Because, you know, my grandma, my late grandma, always said that cedar trees, or any tree really, they hold the memories and the stories of our ancestors. And because trees are like a network under the ground, even if you're super far away from your homelands, you can go and find a tree and speak to it and know that that message is getting sent back to your homelands and to your ancestors. And so many of these trees that are hundreds of years old, they hold those stories of our ancestors that walked here. And I think that just makes me feel at home no matter where I am, because I know that, you know, these trees saw my great-great-grandma harvesting berries, or my great-great-grandfather, you know, going and, you know, swimming in a creek or something like that. And so for me, it's just even more than how sacred that plant, that the cedar is to the Coast Salish people. It's also about family, history, connections. And I also believe that when we connect to the land, when we make those connections to plants, especially Indigenous plants, we are forming this relationship that changes our perspective on how we see the land, how we connect to just to one another, but also to the plants around us. Big example, that there was this patch of stinging nettle that was kind of in the forest near my house, and I was so excited when I found it. It was maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. I know, I was like, yes. And I would visit like all the time, right? I always go see it. And then springtime, I harvest a few of the shoots or a few little tops of it. And it was amazing. Well, one year, this is maybe about right before the pandemic, so about 3 years ago, I was walking by and I noticed that someone had completely like just devastated the entire patch, just taken all of it. And I knew it had been a person, because when there's an animal that's, you know, taking from a plant, you can tell, right? It's a little bit rough, you know, they're there to eat, right? But this was definitely taken by a human. And it was so upsetting to me that, you know, maybe it was one person, maybe it was multiple, I don't know, but that they, to me, hadn't taken that time to actually respect that plant. They probably learned it and go, oh, I can use stinging nettle for X, Y, and Z. I'm just gonna go take it, and took all of it. And it's so important for me, especially as an Indigenous person and as an urban Indigenous person, that we don't always have the access to our homelands. We can't always go out into the bush and to go harvest. So when we find these little pots of plants and we form that connection, it's important for us to make sure that we're also leaving enough for other people, for other Indigenous people or non-Indigenous people, and then we're also leaving enough for the animals, for the birds, the bees, all those pollinators, all those, you know, critters that depend on those plants as well. And so, you know, I'm not trying to make this a lecture here, but I'm just very passionate. And I think that, yeah, like all of us here, I can see a lot of people nodding their head. I'm sure we all kind of feel similarly. And I think it's important for us to have these conversations, because, you know, the more, I'm not ever discouraging people from getting out there and like hiking and going outside, but like, I noticed that the more popular, you know, that has become, the more we see an impact on our Indigenous plants. And I think that Senaqwila and I were even talking the other day about Trillium, and, you know, a lot of people don't know that Trillium, if you pick Trillium, it's minimum 7 years before that flower grows back, minimum. So my grandma said it can take up to 10, right? So we go out there and people go, oh, beautiful flower, like let me go pick this, right? And they're not understanding the consequences of that, right? Because yeah, you might be in the middle of the forest and think, oh, no one needs this, right? But we're actually, we're not thinking about all those other creatures and critters that depend on that, right? The indigenous bees, right, that live in the forest, in like the deep forest, they like, they use that trillium to pollinate it, to provide for their families, right? So I think it's so important for us to like continue to learn and respect plants before we go out and just jump on it to harvest. I always just give the example of elderflower. When I first learned about elderflower, I was a little bit nervous, right? It's a very powerful plant, a very powerful medicine, but you have to be careful because elderflower, the bark, the roots, the leaves, the stems, it all contains like a toxin, right? And so, I was a little bit nervous. So I said, look, it's not the year, right? And the next year came and I still don't know enough. I still haven't formed that relationship with that, right? So I actually waited 3 years until I ever even harvested elderflower. And by that point, I had found a plant that I knew I could identify it. I knew what it looked like all year round. And I kind of formed this relationship. And now I always go buy that plant. I don't take too much from it, just 1 or 2 flowers. And it's like, wow, I feel that connection. But I also feel that connection. I also see the history of me learning about it, right? I see all those times where I was nervous or scared or learned something new and got really excited. And I think that's so important. So I don't mean to take up too much of the time. I can definitely pass it off to you. But, if we have any questions as well about, indigenous plants, I think we can kind of get into that as well.
I think we'll have Alice go next.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
So
hi, Alice.
we have Tsawaysia joining on Zoom, so we'll have her sharing on here. And so I really wanted to get to know a little bit more what it was like to work with the trailing blackberry. For me, I would say it was about 3 years ago, I learned for myself to identify, seeing the silver and different colors in the stem. The leaves are smaller than the invasive blackberry. And of course, in the name trailing, we see it trail, it's low on the ground, it doesn't go up high. So if there's anything you would like to share with us, please, about the blackberry and then the process of, it could be just weaving in general or weaving specifically with this piece. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
So, Hafsquals says min heute an Tsawaysia Spakwus Hachtensguan Eocht Neuer Major heute Chetsiam heute Verhotens Behemen heute Tishet to mail Hachtensguan Eocht Neuer Major Says heute to Haye Lam heute to Scotmush Old Uchamel to Eoch to Scotmush Old Uchamel. My ancestral name is Tsawaysia and I also carry Spakwus. My English name is Alice Guss. I was born and raised in a village called Stotmas. Stotmas means shelter, and what shelter says is the second biggest monolithic granite rock in the world, and we all know that as the Chief. So I had the honors of living in one of our oldest villages of the Squamish Nation, and I actually did leave home to go to college. I came back home. I moved down the city for 6 years. I turned around and I came back home. I've been in education for over 20 years. I worked in the downtown east side for 5 years. So I worked with a lot of borderline homeless people. So it was a really eye-opener for me. And then I started doing my business. I started off with drum making, wool weaving, cedar bark, traditional medicine, the plants. So my teachers were late Diane Billy, late Bernadine Billy, because I used to work up at the Longhouse up here in Squamish, and I went up there because I was teaching the cedar, and then because we had 5 groups up there, the kids, they were learning, and so I just broaden my horizon, you can say it. So anyways, I used to follow Diane and Bernie when they would talk about the plants, and that really, I really took interest in the plants, because knowing that 360 degrees around us, that was our pharmacy before it became Shoppers Drug Mart. 360 degrees around us, that was our grocery store before it became Save On Foods. You know, so we as First Nations people, we always thank everything before we pick it or kill it, right? You know, even when we do pick it, we are actually killing it. But we thank the Creator for giving us the power to be transformers, because we are going to transform Mother Nature's gifts into another gift. It could be a drum, it could be a cedar hat, it could be medicine, it could be salve, you know, the list goes on and on. So we are taught, you know, only to take what we need and not what we want. I remember I was up in Squamish Valley where I go trouting a lot. And then I happened to see a whole bunch of people. They were all bent down like this. And my way of saying, asking, what are they doing? I says, what you guys building? And they turn around and they look, and they had the whole stinging nettles, like they pulled the whole roots and everything. And I told him, I says, well, you know, I says, I was taught only to take the top 4 petals of the stinging nettle, because we want to be sustainable. We want to make sure the stinging nettle comes back next year. And then right in the middle of all of those people, there was a lady, she stood up like this. And then she looked at me and she got really mad at me. And she says, I know what I'm doing. I've been doing this since I was a little girl. I says, fine, fine. I says, that's okay. I says, I just thought I'd share my teachings. And so, you know, that was an example of, you know, we only take what we need and not what we want. So it was so neat because more that I wanted to learn about the plants, the more the plants were coming to me. So when I was first aware of, you guys, you know, of that big hogwort, or that big hogweed plant. So when they were, you know, you see it on the news, you see it like everywhere, and everyone's saying, you got to be careful, you got to be careful. So what did I see in my yard? I thought it was the giant hogweed, and I was freaking out. And then Cease, my friend Cease, she says, oh, that's yarrow. She says, I goes, oh, because, you know, because you think the yarrow starts off small and then it turns into a big hogweed. That's what I thought it was, because, you know, with the white flowers on top. And she goes, oh, no, that's yarrow. It says, oh, awesome. So what did I do? I went and, you know, she shared me some teachings, obviously, but I went back and I went on the computer. And so, you know, that's how I learned. I went and I got a lot of books on the top of my shelf here, all on plants, and read a lot about, you know, from other herbalists, other ethnobotanists. And I go to the public library and I take books out, and I go on YouTube and I go on Google. So just nonstop, just self-taught, more or less. Whenever you find a passion, you know, your dream, it's like it's not work for you, it's not work to you. So if you love learning what you are doing and your passion, and then you're going to just go full board, you're going to go 110%. You know, I'm glad to see each and every one of you here today, you know, taking time out of your busy schedule just to find a bit more about plants. You know, so I tell the kids, you know, what you see in Shoppers Drug Mart, that's what you see out here in our forest. So we have things for headaches, for earaches, for sore throats, for toothaches, for sinuses, broken bones, arthritis, sore muscles, you name it. There's medicine out there. So that's what I really, you know, I you know, when I do a lot of plant walks and workshops and that, but I always tell them that I am not a doctor, I'm not a medicine woman. I only share, you know, like at the entry level of what these plants do, you know, because I'm no pharmacist or anything. I just love sharing what the plants do. You know, some are, like I say, some are good for headaches, or some are good for tummy aches, you know, like the strawberry leaves and the mints, they're good for tummy aches. And then when we were talking about, so we're going to go back to the basket that I made. I actually was last year I got hired through one of the schools in Richmond for me to teach the kids how to make a basket. And I go, what? I got to learn how to make a basket. And so what did I do? I went on YouTube and I just like spend all day on YouTube and trying to find it. And I actually found one. So that's how I learned how to make a basket. And so, you know, we are fortunate here in Squamish, here in our village. We got lots of vines, you know, the blackberry vines. I remember when I was a kid, we were never home. You know, we didn't have, you know, what we have, you know, the kids today, they're always on their iPad or iPhone or whatever. But back in the day, we were never inside. We were always outside playing. And, you know, we would eat the saskies, we would eat the sour leaves, we would eat the berries, you know, the list goes on and on. So we were, you know, we lived on what the Creator has gifted us. So we ate that. And same with the winter time, we were never home. We were always out and about. And my mom, I have 5 brothers and 1 sister. And so you can imagine, you know, costed a lot of money to raise 7 kids. So when we went to go play outside in the snow, because back in the day when I was younger, snow was like 3 or 5 feet high. Like we had a lot of snow when I was a kid. And we were always tobogganing, snow, making snow forts, snowball fights, skating on a ponds and everything. Whenever we only had 2 pairs of pants, just that was our snow pants. You know, my mom couldn't afford to buy us snow pants, so we only had 2 pairs of pants. And when our 2 pants got soaking wet, we would go home, change, put on 2 dry ones, and hang our wet ones in the basement downstairs, right beside the furnace, because we had a wood burning furnace. So yeah, so not knowing that all of these plants that we were eating had medicinal value, but we just know we were allowed to eat them because, you know, my mom and dad ate them, probably our grandparents ate them. So it's just passed, the teachings have been passed down generation to generation. So anyway, so I went and got the leaves. So the vine leaves, so what we do is you grab the vine leaves and you scrape all of the leaves, and you have the stem, and then you have your measurements. And I believe I think I had 8 strands. And then, so any of you guys make a basket before? Not with cedar weaving or anything? So when we make something, had any of you guys wool weave? No? Okay. So when you are making a basket, you got to have an odd number. So obviously when like I said, I started off with 8. I went 4 this way, 4 that way, that's 8. So once I start going around, and then once I start making the basket go up, then I had to add an extra stem, so it makes it even. So I go over 1, under, over, under, like that. So go all the ways around. And you can see you guys can see the little basket in front of you. Is that where it is? Yeah. Yeah, so that was my first attempt of making one. And then because we had such a hard time with COVID, I only went to the class twice in Richmond, and we end up not I ended up not doing it with the school, but I was actually showing the process, you know, the beginning stages of it. And then because I was looking at the our vine blackberries, and then I looked at the Himalayan ones, you know, they're really thick, right? And they're really pokey. And they said that you could take the outer bark off of it. Oh yeah, there we go. So you can take the outer bark of the Himalayans. And you guys remember that cartoon or that commercial? Remember the cheese sticks? Remember the cheese is all in one and you can pull it like shoestrings? So that's what it's like in the inside of the blackberries, the Himalayans. And what you can do, you can make twine with that also. We made twine, you can make twine with the cedar bark. You can make twine with the stinging nettles, and you can make twine with the blackberry bushes, the Himalayans, because it's so thick, but inside you can get a whole lot more out of it. So yeah, so those were I think that back in the day, we didn't have a dollar store to go buy our basket. We didn't go to Walmart to go buy a basket. We had to make our baskets. So, the teachings were anything and everything that we make for the very first time, we got to give it away. So I gave mine to my daughter so I can still have it in the same household and I can still share until I can make another one. We can utilize the technology to help us, to teach us, but at the same time, we are going to go outside into the forest and if you have tobacco, lavender, anything that's environmentally friendly, you are going to offer it to them. You can sing a song, you can offer a prayer, if it's doable, you can hug it, but we're not going to hug the blackberry bush, the Himalayan blackberry bush. So are there any questions or curiosities from the basket? So, my great-great-grandmother, my grandmother, both of my grandmothers passed away even before I was born. But my grandmother, Harriet Douglas, she married my grandfather, so she's Harriet Harry. And her ancestral name is Tsawaysia, so that's where I received my ancestral name. But she was a basket weaver. And so she passed away 10 years before I was even born. But when she passed away, her daughter went and sold all of her baskets out into the public. So we're not even going to be near of seeing any of her baskets, just knowing that it's out there somewhere. Really sad because, any of you guys been to the Museum of North Vancouver? On Esplanade? Yeah, so if you go there, you'll see some baskets, or even if you went to the Museum of Anthropology, you notice there's cedar bark baskets, and then there's cedar root baskets. So our ancestors made the cedar root baskets so tight that absolutely no water can get through. I know the technology was there, the teachings were there, and I believe they may have coated it with either bear grease or seal oil. But our women, they were always working with their hands, really strong. I made a drum traditionally with moose. And so we soaked it in the river for 4 months just for the fur to come off naturally. So once we took it out, so I tell the kids, I says, when you help your mom and dad after supper, when you want to wash the table, and then you put your dishcloth under the tap, and then you got to wring out the excess water. So that's what we had to do with the hide, with the moose. So I had a piece of wood on this stick, and my cousin was on the other side, and we were wringing it like this, turning the hide like this. I was sore for 4 days, something simple as that. So you can imagine how tough the women were, the women were always home working with the wool or the cedar or the roots, or you name it, they were always working with their hands. Meanwhile, the men were always out hunting and fishing, putting food on the table, so to speak. So they either brought home the fish or they brought home the sea life, like crabs or prawns or mussels. They brought, deer or elk, or because back in the day, we had no freezers or fridges, so they had to preserve it. My dad always says, the non-First Nations, he goes, that's so weird. He goes, they take their vacation at the wrong time because every year everyone takes off July and August, right? Because that's when we got to work the hardest. Because, we work every spring, the summer, and the fall because we got to get ready for the winter. Because even back in it, like I say, back in the day, even my dad's generation, the snow was higher than 5 feet tall. Like the snow was humongous. There was lots of snow. Now we're lucky if we get this much in Vancouver, and it's going to melt by the end of the day, right? So big difference, big difference. And then we always have to depend on, it's not like we're going to say every May 21 we are going to go harvesting cedar. You know what I mean? So it all depends on the weather. We might have a long winter, we might have a short winter. So we First Nations people, we had time of. So we know when the monarch butterflies were flying, then we knew the spring salmon was going up the river. When we know when the dogwood flowers are flowering, then we know we could harvest the cedar bark. You know, there was always time of, you know, the Mother Nature always would help us and tell us when we can go out and harvest. So the word of the wise, you know, with the stinging nettles, we know we don't harvest the stinging nettles if it's already flowered. It'll become more toxic than anything else. So if we ever harvest the stinging nettles, it's got to be like yay high, and we want to take the top 4 leaves because we want to be sustainable. So with the stinging nettles, you can make tea, you can eat it raw, you can make soup, you can make salve, you can make the oil, you know, the tincture, the list goes on and on. Yeah, so are there any questions, curiosities about anything?
I just wanted to know if you have experience to share on stripping the Himalayan blackberry without getting eaten alive.
Near the end, you're going to go at the end of the bush. So in other words, you're not going to go smack in the middle of the bush, right? You're going to get the ones that's near the end.
And do you just use a knife then, pulling along the outside, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you guys going to try it? Awesome. Sweet.
I have a question. Maybe I'll come over there. So, hi, my name is Nicole. My question was with your basket, like, have you made one of those baskets like with other material, or do you just like to use the trailing blackberry?
I actually just did the trailing blackberries so far, or actually I made one with wool.
Whoa.
Yeah. So, but the inside, or how do you call it? The spokes.
Yeah.
It's like thick, round, like a rope.
Yeah.
And then you use the wool to go around. Yeah, I made one probably about 10 years ago, and because that was my first one, I gifted it to my friend in Seychelles.
No way.
Or yeah, in Gibson, sorry. Yeah. So if I can find that picture, I'll send it to Senaqwila.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I did it with the elders back in the day, just up the hill from here.
Yeah.
So I did it with cedar bark. I did it with the rope and the wool, and then the blackberry vines. And I have been gifted cedar roots, but that's on my bucket list. Like it's sitting upstairs in my house right now. So it's a matter of me trying to find a teacher. And the majority of the teachers would be up in Mount Currie, the Lillooet.
Yeah, totally. I actually have some spruce roots, and I've also been waiting because I don't have anyone to teach me. So I've been like holding on to them. Like, does anyone know how to use these? So if you ever find a teacher, let me know.
Yeah.
Nice, very cool. Yeah, I was just gonna say, because I've seen baskets like that too, made with English ivy, you know, like the green invasive plant. I've seen those done before. So I actually thought that's what your basket was made out of. But it's really cool to see that you did the trailing blackberry. Like, I love that.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Everyone's freaking out. They said, didn't you get poked? He goes, not really. Well, you just wear other gloves, right? And just slide it across, get all the leaves off. Yeah.
Well, one time I was harvesting Devil's Club with a Gitsan elder, and I brought all these gloves and these tools. And he's like, what do you have those for? And I was like, it's like pokey. And he's like, no. He grabs the plant by his hand and he just starts going like this. And I was like, oh my, like my worst fear. And he's like, no, it's medicine. It's okay. And you know, I respect to that, but I don't know if I have tough enough hands. So anyways, thank you so much, Alice.
Okay. Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoy trying to make it.
I could listen to you tell stories all day.
Oh yeah, I love telling stories. I do it at the museum on Fridays. I do the gallery tour, and then usually I do cedar or wool or the canoes or pictographs, petroglyphs, like the list goes on. I did residential schools. Yeah, it's a long list I can do. I used to have a website, but I've been so busy that I didn't even renew my website. And they give you a month leeway, right? Like they say your deadline's December, we're only going to give you till January. And did I pay it? No. I'm just so busy. But yeah, you can just Google, you know, my name on, well, just Google my name, my English name, Alice Guss or Tsawaysia Spakwus, and you can see all the work that I've done. You know, I was, like I say, I was a director of education, so I did a lot of admin work. And I used to hire cultural people to come and do the cultural work, you know, for our community. And then I left Squamish Nation and like I say, I moved down the city for 6 years, North Vancouver. So I worked as a director of education for Tsawwassen First Nation. So I implement a lot of language and culture into their community. So anyways, I hire, you know, people to come in and do the drum making workshops. And then one of the elders says, Alice, she goes, did you ever make a drum before? And I goes, no. She goes, well, sit down and make one. I goes, okay, elder speaks, you got to listen. So I sat down, I made my first drum. And then I gave that to my son. My first cedar hat that I made, I gave it to my son, Nathan, and he was one of the 300 First Nations youth that performed at the 2010 Olympics at BC Place. And the security was so tight that all the regalia went that way. You know, they were all labeled with stickers and on the hangers, and they had their cedar hats hanging over their hangers. And then all the people had to go out that way at that door. So my son came out of BC Place, but his hat didn't. And it was really sad because the eagle feather that was beaded, that was on his cedar hat, was beaded by his late Auntie Carol. And so we never get that feather back, or, you know, all we can do is share the story. So when I found out the hat wasn't, he didn't get his hat, so I phoned, I faxed, I emailed, I physically went to the office in Vancouver, but nothing. I told Vancouver Sun interviewed me one time and says, well, we got to do this and we're going to do this worldwide. She says, she never did yet though. Yeah, so my first shawl that I made, I gave it to my daughter. She was probably about 7 years old then. And she was in grade 12. Well, they always did what they call 24-hour drum. If you guys want to Google that, 24-hour drum, House Sound Secondary, and Mount Currie, the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, because they're in school district 48. So those two nations would get together and the kids pick out their own theme, what they want to share to the schools. And what they do, they bounce from one high school to the next high school. So they go to Squamish, Whistler, and Pemberton, and they just share, like they showcase, you know, who they are, where they come from, share the teachings. And my daughter, she put on her shawl that I gave her when she was like 7 years old. I says, Dominique, I says, that shawl's too small on you. She says, it's okay, Mom, I'm gonna wear it. So I got her another shawl, the one that actually fits her now. I made a shawl, 2 shawls for my 2 granddaughters. They're 5 years old now, but they have like a baby ceremony. So the nation has a baby ceremony every year, and they do like a potlatch style, right? They would come, and the parents are responsible of making gifts or giving gifts away after. So what they do is they sing in all the babies in, and they all sit down with their like a caretaker, one that's going to look after them, while the mom and dad stand behind them in the chair. So meanwhile, also a lot of people are making regalia. So I made 2 blankets for my granddaughters, and then the headbands. It was so cute. And then the very next day, my son and daughter-in-law got married, so I was super busy. Yeah.
Are you in, it's North Vancouver Museum that you were in on a Friday? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we just did honor their mother last Thursday night. We had a 30-minute documentary, and then Senaqwila and I are going to be doing, we're going to bring in a lot of Indigenous knowledge keepers, cultural workers, and they're going to share. So we're going to slot them in at the museum. So keep your eye open on the website. So we're still at the stages of getting Tsleil-Waututh right now, but we have, we have some Squamish representation. So the beauty of the museum is they honor both nations that they reside on, the unceded territory. Yeah. And then we're going to have the movie Brother Bear. We're going to have a matinee. We're going to have smoke signals. Any of you guys see smoke signals?
Yes.
All right, we're gonna review that. And any of you guys see the movie The Grizzlies? Yeah, Grizzlies based on a true story, and very inspirational. I really love that. I chose that one because it's all related to Indigenous people, even though both of them are Inuit, but they're still Indigenous. Yeah. Awesome.
Beautiful. We want to thank you for joining us and sharing with us. And it's really beautiful to look at the weaving here on display and get to hear that kind of background of how you came across your learning journey. So Hoichuka, thank you so much. And we'll be
Okay, so I'll just quickly give you my email. It's tsawaysia@gmail.com. So T like in Thomas, S like in snake, A WAY, S like in snake, IA. So tsawaysia@gmail.com. If you want to follow through with any more questions. So I just want to thank Senaqwila, thank the Maple Wood. Yeah, I want to thank you guys for allowing me to be in your guys' beautiful circle here today. We'll see you. So it's good in my heart. You're doing an awesome job.
I'm Erica, she, her pronouns. I'm a white settler of mixed European Dutch descent. And I mainly work with invasive plants, is my sort of bread and butter material. And it's been a practice I've been developing for the past however long the pandemic's been going on for. I don't know how long that is anymore, whatever that was. But not very long, but it's been a practice I've been sort of continuously developing and evolving, and I keep changing with. So I do a combination of invasive plant removal work in the woods. It's not quite official, so I don't feel like saying which one. Where I work in there, and then in tangent with that, and as part of that continued exploration of invasive plants, I also explore making things with invasive plants and uses for invasive plants. So basketry, cordage, natural dyeing, food is one that I've started to explore. The list goes on. There's a lot. They're wonderful plants in context and in an understanding relationship. And I think that to me is the really crucial part of of understanding invasive plants and working with invasive plants is understanding that the plants themselves are not necessarily the problem. They're indicators and perpetuators of what I think of as broken relationships. Broken relationships between the settlers who purposely brought them over and advertised them like Himalayan blackberry isn't from the Himalayas. That was an advertising gimmick to sell the seeds from a botanist whose name I don't remember.
no idea.
Yeah, it's not from, it's from like Armenia. It's not from, that's just straight up advertising gimmick. Or English ivy, which is obviously from Europe. Those were sort of brought over on purpose as ornamentals, or in the case of Himalayan blackberry, because the berries are delicious, or for any of these reasons. And then through a combination of things, like our sort of dismissal of ancestry and picking up on whiteness as an identity instead, we have sort of abandoned the responsibilities that I think we hold towards the plants that we've brought over. And in breaking our, like as a settler, breaking our relationship to those plants, we've allowed them to proliferate in the ways that they have. It's also worth looking at places where invasive plants have taken over is largely places with highly disturbed areas, so roadsides, areas that have been logged, and all of these sorts of things. And so there are also areas that have where the land has been disturbed, and not only do have settlers sort of abandoned and foregone their, I think, responsibilities to these plants and relationships with these plants, they've also frequently violently broken and purposefully broken Indigenous people's relationship to those plants as well. The roles that people play in plants is people are part of ecosystems, and we've largely disturbed those, and that includes a human relationship to ecosystems as well. For instance, the woods that I work in are, as you mentioned, logs, just like everything else around here. And it's also proliferated with English ivy is the main plant I do removal work with, because it's the one most prominent in the woods. And I frequently ask myself the question of if the giant stumps that are massive, if those were still there, if the area hadn't been logged, and if all of these things hadn't happened, would the English ivy have moved in? And I doubt it, or at least not to the extent that it has. To which it's worth noting that the issues are much bigger than just the English ivy. They're, the resource extraction, the logging, the settler colonialism, the climate chaos, all of these ongoing issues as well are part of the issues with invasive plants. And I think some of the narratives around invasive plants use them as an easy scapegoat, because it's easier to talk about. It's easier to talk about that one plant instead of all of these big issues. Which is not to say that these plants are harmless. These plants sort of, I think, can interfere with recovery processes and interfere with rebuilding and healthy relationships. And to me, that's sort of the crucial part of it, is trying to build and rebuild healthy relationships. And for me, part of that is doing this removal work and sort of taking this responsibility for these plants, but then also building a relationship with those plants as well. So and part of that comes through working with materials and working with them and exploring how they work and how they function and what you can do with them, and like all of these little details. It's a really beautiful way of sort of acknowledging both the harm that these plants do and also the gifts that they have as well. For instance, I work with English ivy through basketry. You can make a similar basket to that. You work with it fresh and make some really quick, beautiful baskets. I like to split and peel it, and you get this beautiful, like, thin white, ivory colored, not ivory, but like beige colored thing, or poly, which is an ivory color that is carved beautifully, which is another hobby I want to pick up, but oh my gosh, there's too many. Or for instance, after this, if the weather stays nice and it doesn't start pouring rain, my plan is to go and check out a patch of Japanese knotweed that I've recently found in the woods that I'm working on. Somehow I recently found it, and I'm very distressed by it because I didn't know it was there before. I'm like, oh my gosh, how did I not know this? But I'm going to pull up a bunch of the shoots to use for food. I'm going to experiment with cooking those, which is not something I have much experience with. And then the roots I'm going to pull up and use for dyeing, because they make a gorgeous dye. And so yeah, understanding the complexity of those relationships is both, as relationships that need constant, that need mending and attention and care, and all of these complicated, interconnected political processes are shown in these tiny little plants that exist just on the roadside that you walk past every day. I think that's the big spiel. So for instance, I have some of the baskets there. I have some cordage that was made with Himalayan blackberry. If you want to take a look at that as well, I'm also happy to point it out. I make it from the younger canes, so right now it's a little bit earlier, but in a few months it'll be perfect to go and cut all of the new canes and sort of go, sorry, you grew all this weight, I'm gonna stop you from growing anymore, and I'm gonna take all these canes back and I'm gonna turn it into cordage that's really strong, actually. Himalayan blackberry's fibers are really strong. Or English ivy, which I use in basketry, or bindweed or morning glory, whichever you feel like calling it. I switch back and forth depending on the day, depending on how much I like the plant, really is what it is. I'm a bit more annoyed that it's bindweed if I was like, oh, that's so pretty, but it's morning glory. Makes a beautiful weaving material, and it comes in this beautiful array of colors. You can get it from like a green to a gold to a red to a black. Ooh. And getting the rainbow out of it is just stunning. And so this plant that is, for many people who garden, quite a pest, is for me quite something that I'm quite delighted by in the ways that it grows and the variety that you get out of it. There's also a Scotch broom basket there as well. Wow. Which has been the sort of tips of the plant have been taken and bundled and made into a coiled basket in a similar style to a pine needle basket. So it's taking, sort of pulling from these different traditions. That's one of the other beautiful things about basketry is that it's a nearly universal practice. Different places and different cultures have different materials and different ways of working with it, but people need to carry stuff pretty much anywhere. So there's sort of these long traditions for essentially everyone of some way you're connected to basketry in particular.
What's really cool is that you can also use, like, say, English ivy to create like a really, small basket, but you can use that basket to plant indigenous plants in. So like I've done a project where we've made like little baby, like little seedlings, right? Yeah. And we planted indigenous plants, and then when that plant is big enough, we take it out and we can plant in the actual ground, and then it's kind of giving that second life to that, right? So yeah.
There's a project that I want to recreate that uses Japanese knotweed fibers. Cool. There's a bunch of people who use them in paper making, but they use them to make like those little starter seedling ones that are compostable. So I really want to do that one. But yeah, so these plants can be sort of aids in that process of biomass restoration. Some of them are really good at accumulating heavy metals. Some of them just make really nice compost that you can just, because they've got a lot of biomass, you can chop it all down and compost it. Again, but be cautious with that because they like to spread. So you can't just throw them in the compost. You have to like purposely do it and then continuously monitor it all the time. Yeah, because if invasive plants are anything, it's persistent is the word I'm going to use there.
And I think that's like a really good point to kind of emphasize is like, when I was talking about creating that relationship with indigenous plants, you could even do so with invasive plants. Absolutely. You could go and find a patch where it's like maybe being taken over and create a relationship and like go back multiple times a year and learn when do you take them up. Because sometimes you can't take out certain plants in summer or spring because they're blooming, right? But find those times at work and then create a relationship, whether it's through basket making or maybe use it for food or whatever it is, right? You can do the same thing but with other plants.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love the idea of sort of adopting a little space, like a little corner that you walk past all the time or whatever it is, sort of ideally close to home or convenient, so you can check in on it all the time. And it also means that if you are hoping to do like restoration work with it, you can work with the invasive plants as you sort of learn what other creatures move through that. Like if it's a Himalayan blackberry, do a bunch of birds use it for cover, do a bunch of bees like the pollination from it, do a bunch of things, eat the berries, and then you can sort of think about what you want to do in that restoration process. Yeah, just not just removing that plant, but making sure that you're maintaining those sort of needs of the things as well.
Very cool. Nice. Does anyone have any questions? I think we can also talk, yeah, so I'm sorry.
I just have a question in terms of, I wonder if you guys have played with, like, kind of jostling the idea of invasive plants or using a different kind of framework. Because, you know, like the critiques are like returning to the history of invasivity, like in invasive species ecology, like those are coming from pre-Darwinian, like Victorian categories of like the native and the citizen, and so I just wonder if in your work you have explored other frames or ways of because the way you're talking about them, like this seems to be a different kind of framing. So just in terms of
I've thought a bit about finding different phrasing for invasive plants. I haven't found anything. So at the moment I just keep the phrase and then try and build this framework around it. But yeah, there's a lot of complexity to especially the language we use around invasive plants. There's, you know, ways that invasive plants perpetuate and represent, that's the other word I was thinking of, and sort of symbolize these settler colonial patterns, but also there's narratives around them where there's levels of like racism and concerns. I'm of the opinion that some of the worry about Japanese knotweed is like the reason we're freaked out about it more than we are about English ivy is a little complicated, and there are good reasons to be concerned about it, but also there's it's one of the invasive plants that isn't from Europe, and it's the one that people freak out about a lot, and I think that's worth questioning. So I don't have better language.
I often say when I'm doing a plant tour, I often don't refer to things like usually as invasive. I'll often just say like, this is a plant that's indigenous to here, or I'll say this is a non-indigenous plant to here, because it's obviously indigenous to somewhere, just not here.
Plants gotta come from somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't come from the moon.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and then on top of that, sometimes I'll talk about naturalized plants, right? Plants like frogleaf or foxglove that are actually not from here, but have been here so long that they've naturalized and they found a way that they actually don't compete with indigenous plants from here. They actually don't compete with them, and they're not like overtaking large swaths of area, right? So I kind of like that for myself because, and I always talk about like I said, the plants around here are indigenous to here, but that doesn't mean that the Himalayan blackberry, I gotta find the actual name for that now. But you know,
it's called Himalayan blackberry.
Okay, that is
the
cool.
actual name for it. It's just not from the
Himalaya. So finding ways to recenter that, like where do these plants come, and like for a good example, like English ivy in England, like that's how I started learning about the different uses for them, right? It was like asking my friends and family that are from England and being like, well, what do you guys do? And they're like, oh, like naming all these things. And I was like, wow, it doesn't have that negative connotation over there that it might do here, and so I think it is important to do that. I think it's a slow process and wanting to do it in a good way, and
One thing I've noticed in how both of you and Alice have talked about it, it's the emphasis on relationship, right? And so how can you and I be a good relationship with this plant? What does that mean? What is my responsibility to the plant? How can I give? How can I send gifts? How can I gift back? So it's not, we still have the language, which is problematic, but your framework has been relationship, and I really appreciate that.
If you have a magical word, let me know. But finding words to put things into concepts is tricky.
I think another word that's used is introduced, and it might have the same connotations as invasive.
It's cool.
Maybe something like that.
There's a bit of variety and complication there, which is for me when I think about invasive plants, the way that those are defined is based on their relationship. Like an invasive plant is defined by its relationship to other plants, people, animals, or capitalistic economies. Production is often also one of them too. That one's pretty high on the list of what sometimes defines an invasive species. I think understanding like the invasiveness as the definition of its particular relationship in this particular context is easier. And not all introduced plants have that similar sort of relationship, like frogweed, for instance, or plantain, which is one that I know, which generally seems to sort of coexist in this much more collaborative way as opposed to these ones. So I still want to make the distinction between like invasive and introduced, but also yeah, I don't know.
It's language is to jump in, and I think we'll be closing the Zoom down now, and I'll be starting at about a 30-minute plant walk along the trail. So we're welcome to continue the conversation. I just wanted to, we